the first 2 months of the fiscal year, October, November, they've gone nearly $1 trillion into debt. That's the worst 2 month start to calendar year in the history of the U.S. Treasury. It took to 2009 to reach that level of stupidity in an entire year, and now they do it in 2 months. All of the laws that he just signed into to law about drilling offshore along the coast of the United States, hundreds of millions of miles, cumulatively. I think it was that large anyway. Massive square mile acreage of non-drillable U.S. coastal land or sea or whatever you want to call it. I'm sorry, I'm at a loss for words. All I'm saying is that he's now, Trump's drill baby drill, and he's coming in and doing all he can. The escalation in the Ukraine, the escalation in Syria. I mean, you're telling me that Biden had anything to do with any of these things? My bigger question is who's doing this? Who's pushing all these buttons and doing all of these things, selling the border wall at 5 cents on the dollar? I mean, it's just, so they don't oppose it, but they just screw them in every other possible way. It's still grotesque as can be. Sure, there's an opportunity to make a lot of money. Take that money and put it into real assets. I mean, let's just break it down little by little. You got the central banks of the world doubling down. They bought, you look at the amount of gold they bought in November, doubling the 12-month moving average. They're buying more than ever right now. They're not doing that with Bitcoin. And they're doing it with money that they traditionally put into U.S. treasuries. Instead of putting those reserves, that money into treasuries, earning a yield from the safest, destination in the world, they're putting it into gold, which has bettered the performance 2-to-1 of the 10-year treasury over 25 years, but no counterparty liability and no inflation risk that they see as stark. And so that money that was supporting our debt, to me, if I just am trying, let me put it this way, I can't shake out of the back of my mind that it's no surprise, therefore, that this administration has been vocally supportive of cryptocurrency, because the inflows, the increasing inflows, largely institutional inflows and retail, but into crypto, they're by default, if you will, boosting the reserves available to be recycled into U.S. treasuries. All of the stable coins are 85-90+% backed by U.S. treasuries and U.S. dollars primarily. So it's supporting the legacy system, which is the cruel irony of it all. I did an interview with Francis Hunt. I'm not saying that this is my view, but this is Francis's view, that he said Trump was selected. I said, what? He said selected. You can go watch it on my YouTube channel. He said, there are people pulling the strings, nameless, faceless, pulling the strings, that he was brought into, and his cabinet to do just that, to, bring in the digital system, roll in the digital ID, which he just announced he was going to do in the name of election integrity. We've been talking about that for a while. Yeah. That was obvious. But if you look at the patents, who's behind ID 2020, it's Bill Gates, it's the Rockefeller Foundation, and I forgot the name, they're not a pharmaceutical company, but a think tank, if you will, for vaccines. And it's scary as hell when you read, just Google Bill Gates digital ID 2020 patents, and you'll find a trail. And then it's the same cast of characters in their cashless society group. There's a company that he has as well, and if I were to put my glasses on and start digging through my computer, I'd find it. I've done talks on it, but it's scary that they're all tied together in that way. Now, I'm not saying this is the case, but what I am saying is that he said that he was brought in specifically, that a lot of the stuff we saw over the last several years was orchestrated. They didn't put up any opposition in terms of his running mate, who he was running against, and that he would come in and take over with a cabinet that would reinstill American ideals and culture after 4 years of living in bizarro world, that would be primary, and people would appreciate that his cabinet would be one of a digital focus, and look at Elon, and that people would be more and more comfortable with digital, ultimately moving, I suppose, to a digital surveillance state, cashless society. Now, I'm not saying I believe that, but I do think that if you haven't, over the last 4 years, learned to question everything, and people get pissed at me when I say, is Trump the Trojan horse, or is he riding the Trojan horse? I don't know. I'd like to hope that he's riding it and not it. My point to you is that after what we've lived through, you have to question everything. Everything we saw primarily over the last 4 years has been a lie. And that's proven true, even all the way down to pardoning Hunter Biden. It was a lie right in our face. I would not do that. No. And then he does it. And if he was a gentleman, he could have still pardoned his son. I'm a father, I get it. But at the same time, he could have said, you know what, I'm pardoning Donald too. This shit's got to end right now. And he didn't. And he just created more of this divisiveness. And he's leaving. And he did it in a chicken shit way, just left and went to Africa, didn't even face the music. And then all of these decisions that they're making at the 12th hour as a lame duck president are just beyond concerning from the standpoint of what the hell are they doing this for? And do they really care about our country? So if they're doing it on the way out, what are they going to do to challenge him once he's in? I think there's a lot of caution that should be used right now. The exuberance borders on irrationality in the fact that, if that's a word, irrationality, let's just say it's irrational, in the respect that we've lived through a really weird time and an awful time, and I think getting our culture back is warranted to be exuberant and to be psyched and to think that, yeah, I mean, thank God he's here, and I personally do feel that way. But there is an awful lot of issues that must be resolved, and banking issues, debt issues, not to, just to name a couple, and those are big ones, and the list goes on from there. But what Biden is doing on the way out is just insanity. Well, I had Judy Shelton on my show recently. Amazing lady, smart lady. Chances are she'll be part of the Federal Reserve Board. Hopefully, she was an advisor to Trump's previous administration. Very neat lady, Austrian school economist. Believes very much in gold, has an idea to issue 50-year treasuries redeemable in gold. And she thinks there's a probability anyway that Trump will issue them July 4th, 2026, which will be the 250th anniversary of the country, and that they almost issued them in the previous administration but did not. So I asked her what everyone wanted to know, and that is, well, do we even have the gold? Why do they not audit it? Why has it not been audited since 1953? And she said basically the reasonings that we're always given were bullshit, too expensive, logistically challenged. I mean, she's like, spend a few $1 million and do it. We're the United States of America, for crying out loud. We can do this. That would be needed to be done immediately in order to restore that confidence, along with selling treasuries redeemable in gold, which would also install confidence. She said something that was very interesting. She said, and I could see them issuing stable coins off of those redeemable treasuries. And she's a very forward-thinking person. I asked her an interesting question, too. You should listen to it. I said, who the hell in their right mind chose a 2% inflation target? I said, because in 10 years, that means you've lost 20%. So did the dollar lose all of its value, or did everything just get really expensive? I don't know. That's the point. And her answer was fascinating. But yeah, I think that, look, the Bank of International Settlements wouldn't have reclassified gold as the world's only other tier 1 reserve asset if it weren't part of the plan moving forward. And the accumulation by the central banks doubling and tripling down recently would not have happened or continue to happen following a 2-3 year trend if there weren't some very substantial things coming for gold. Something just happened that really caught my attention. So we've always talked about JP Morgan's role in suppressing metals and how they paid a $920 million fine for manipulating the metals market, right? And they were the custodian and still are the custodian of the world's largest silver trust, SLV. So here it is, a company that admits to manipulating the market. Their head trader, Michael Nowak, who I've met before, is still in prison for manipulating the silver market. And they're allowed to continue to be the custodian of the world's largest silver trust. And then we would always, obviously, people would say, do you think gold will be confiscated again? And I would always say, well, to me, it wouldn't do them any good to confiscate the gold. It would be better to confiscate the ETFs. I've said that on 500 podcasts, going way back. I mean, way back. Even before JP Morgan was known to be who they are. So I said, look, it would be much easier to take the gold held by the ETFs, which would be the largest stockpile of silver and the fourth or fifth largest stockpile of gold, without breaking any laws or infringing any civil liberties. Be much easier to do that. Look the world in the face, say, well, we didn't do anything. You can still buy this stuff physically. We just closed a couple of ETFs, which we have the right to do. Cynthia Loomis talks about the Bitcoin, strategic Bitcoin reserve here in the United States. Well, funny, she also talks about funding it by revaluing the gold held supposedly by the Fed on behalf of the Treasury. Revaluing it to what? And why did JP Morgan take possession or be the custodian of both SLV and GLD? Could they say, we're going to confiscate those two funds and remonetize or revalue the price of gold? Those of you that still own physical, you can keep it. Instead of doing this 1933 executive order to steal gold, they would just take all of it held by JP Morgan with a big pink bow wrapped around it, massive stockpiles, and let the little crumbs that the rest of us public own stand. It would be such a tiny minority that it really wouldn't matter.